The boutique leverless controller from SquidBox has returned with the Mark II. But apart from the color being blue this time, what has actually changed and what makes it worth going for this one as opposed to the previous edition? The main thing, of course, is that now we're in the PS5 generation. This is a PS5 compatible arcade controller. It is not obviously officially licensed. It is using a Brook P5 Mini. As you can see, compared to the original controller, a whole lot of other stuff has also changed. So let's go into the changes. Now, full disclosure, SquidBox did send this controller to me for the purposes of making this video, but I haven't been instructed to say anything specific, and all opinions are, of course, my own. Let's talk about what the main features are. It's a leverless controller, so unlike an arcade stick, you don't use a lever. You have the directions separated into left, down, right, and up, and then you've got your normal action buttons here on the side. And so like other leverless controllers, the main benefit is that you have separated directional control for shortcuts, but also just precision. If you have that issue of accidentally going into a diagonal when you were just trying to go forward, now you can't really make that mistake as easily because you're just pressing the button. There are some pitfalls, of course, to playing on a leverless controller, but with practice, you should be able to get over most of them. What's exciting about the SquidBox is that this is a controller built and assembled in France. So as a result, it is supposedly going to be easier to access for people in Europe who have trouble importing controllers from the US. So of course, it's nice to have plenty of alternatives, and what's really cool about the SquidBox is it doesn't really look like all of the other controllers out there. Now, of course, the leverless layout has kind of become set in stone. Most people are using this or some variation of something like this, but the controller itself, because it uses low-profile key switches, it can be really nice and slim. It doesn't have to use a really thick enclosure so that you use the standard arcade buttons. It's using Kale Chalk V2 low-profile switches, and the ones that it comes with on the standard edition is the red key switches. Coupled with what looks like Punk Workshop keycaps, they are nice and responsive, as you would expect, super fast. They got a nice feel because the construction is rigid enough that the switches properly bounce straight up. And already I can tell you it's a massive improvement over the original SquidBox, which used their own 3D printed buttons. These felt a little bit clunky, and even though it came with a few spare extra buttons, when they first shipped it to me, they were getting snagged on the edges. So even though I switched them out for buttons that were absolutely fine after that, it's always a little bit risky to make your own button keycaps if you already know that there's a company out there that makes cheap keycaps already. The other thing that you can see is that the design looks very different to other controllers because it has what looks like the sort of Mac computer unibody frame, or the sort of frame that you would get on the old iPhones, like the iPhone 5. Glass on the front, glass on the back, and just an aluminium frame that went all the way around. It just looks like it's been CNC'd out of a single slab of aluminium. I don't know if that's actually the process they've gone to make it, but it does look like that. Design-wise, that's a pretty big difference, going from plastic and plastic to going, it actually kind of looks more like a product now, but it has a much more Gundam feel to it because of all these beveled edges. You know, instead of rounded corners like before, they've been cut off like this, and then, you know, they are still nice and round so that they don't hurt, but as you can see, it's not a rounded rectangle anymore. The direction buttons and action buttons feel fantastic in gameplay, but you also have this array of option buttons here at the top, and I'll just read them out to you. They are PlayStation Home, Options, Share, Touchpad, L3, and R3. One of the fantastic things about a controller like this is that it has nice, big, flat buttons for these options. Instead of, again, looking at the original version, it had those sort of cheap, they didn't hurt, but they're these cheap plastic, tiny, like 2mm push switches. They still have that kind of prototype look, like we haven't decided what button to put on here yet. The other thing is that the labels are much easier to read now because they're written right below the whole array, where before they were written above the array and they actually kind of got cut off by the plastic. Not that that really matters, because even though it's easier to read and these buttons are easier to press, they are still really cramped together and they do all look exactly the same. And this is a little bit of an issue on almost all leverless controllers because they're trying to stay as small as possible and keep these buttons on the front and accessible. They just squash them all into the same place and leave them all the same shape. But when you are playing a fighting game, you will reach for these buttons all the time because you're going to be resetting the training stage, pressing the options menu, when all of these buttons look exactly the same, you will never know what buttons you'll press unless you kind of do the braille thing. So you just kind of close your eyes. You go, okay, I'm on the first one here. I'll just slide over. Okay, the second one is the options button. If you don't spend any time in training mode, obviously not a big issue. One thing I love about this controller, though, is just aesthetically, the whole thing holds together really well. In addition to this aluminum frame that goes around the edge, it's using the same color and material for these buttons over here. And design-wise, something that's just consistent for this controller all around is that it just feels much more like a polished product. Here you can see the USB-C port on the back. Before, it was obviously just exposed. They cut a hole in the plastic where the USB port needs to be accessed. With this, they've actually molded the aluminum frame. I don't know if the word is countersunk, but it's sunk in. You could design it like some controllers have, so that even if you did wrench the USB-C cable, you wouldn't actually damage the port, but that's not what this is. It just looks really nice. The flashy design doesn't end on the front. Obviously, you've got the plastic clear backing on the controller as well, and you can see how it works. You can see where those hot swap key switches are. You can even see little things like the ribbon cable going from the PCB to the USB-C port itself. And I quite like that the USB-C port is not on the PCB itself. So one of the main benefits of having a clear front and a clear back is that, of course, if you are interested in drawing some artwork, you could have it go from the front to the back. You could do something clever like having the face of the character on the front and maybe the back of their head on the back of the controller. It's really nice visually, but as you can see, it doesn't have non-slip padding all over the bottom. In fact, there's no non-slip padding anywhere on the bottom of this. It comes with some rubber feet that you can stick on here if you're going to be using it on a desk. If you are the type of person who shifts around in your seat a lot, maybe you play on a sofa and your legs are always tilted away from you, then you might need non-slip padding just to hold it in place. As you can see, there's no non-slip padding here, and even if you did have it, it would cover up this beautiful design of having the clear back. So that's the controller design, but how does it feel to play with in practice? Well, it's not the longest controller. Even really small controllers, they tend to be like maybe a centimeter or a couple centimeters longer than this. So in your lap, it may feel like it'll slide between your legs if you've got your legs spread wide open, but if you have your legs moderately close together, you know, it's just like any other controller. Feels pretty good in the lap. It's not very heavy. I believe it is 800 grams, so it's like 100 grams heavier than the previous controller. I'm very happy with the spacing. Sometimes controllers come with this jump button way too low or way too tucked in under the action buttons, but this layout is basically perfect for me. Put my hands on here, and as you can see, my fingers fall exactly into the right places on these buttons, so I'm very happy with the button placement. One thing I will say on the button placement is that it doesn't have extra buttons like L3 and R3 on the front down here. They're still here in the control panel. One of the main prevailing trends with leverless controllers at the moment is moving L3 and R3 down to somewhere that is a little easier to access with a large button with its own key switch. Instead, if it's up here, then you're not really going to be able to use it in a game. So it is a shame that a brand new controller coming out doesn't have those extra buttons, but you need to ask yourself, do you use those buttons anyway? I love the key switches and I love the keycaps as well, but one thing I wasn't too keen on is the amount of flex that you get on the key switches. I've tried this on other controllers and it doesn't seem to happen, but on this controller, the actual key switch, this little Kale Choc V2 key switch will rock around. Even though it's planted firmly in the PCB, there is still a bit of flex, and I don't know why that is, because it looks like it's held in place in exactly the same way as other Kale switches that are in other controllers, but on the Squid Box V2, you do see it rotates around like this. Now, when I was actually playing matches, could not feel that. It makes me feel a little bit nervous looking at it, but I've been playing on this for weeks now, and I've never had a button like fly out of it or anything. So I'm not worried, but I did want to mention that it does rock around a little bit. You might want to open this up at some point, and as you can see, it uses Allen keys. And for whatever reason, they didn't include an Allen key, and that seems like a little strange sort of exclusion. A few other things I would change. I know that this cutout here is just to show the Brook P5 Mini PCB, but it still kind of bothers me that the words here, Squid Box revision 1.0 or 0.8 or whatever version number you're putting on here, it does still annoy me that the word is cut off by the plastic. I do think the design on the left side has been improved because before they had this special cutout just so it was, I don't know, I think it was just so it was easier to see the Squid Box logo. Also, on that note, since it's got a blue PCB now, that's quite unusual, so it's quite unique looking. And secondly, because it's using white ink, I just feel like it works better. It's not that I dislike the Squid Box logo, but I think when it was in black, it had that kind of manga feel. I think white and blue is just less contrasty than black and white. If you do want to print out some artwork and slide that underneath here, that is possible. This is the box that it comes in, and I think that's fantastic because a lot of these leverless controllers, they don't really come in very nice packaging. This is a proper, like, iPad box. Is it an octopus or is it a squid? The only thing I want to say about this bag is that although it's cool that it's got the Squid Box logo on it, it is way too big for this controller. I mean, I guess, yeah, you can put other stuff in it, but I don't think I'd want to put other stuff in a bag with my Squid Box. I think I'd want to keep it nice and separate. It's a fingerprint magnet. There's like almost no way to use this controller without getting your fingerprints all over it. So it's a nice box, but I think this brings me on to the next topic of, is it worth the price? I generally don't speak about the prices of these controllers, but I think I'm going to start talking about it a little bit because this does come in at $300. I think the current price is 274 euros. It's kind of on par with other controllers out there, but what you should know is that for $300, you can buy a leverless controller for PlayStation 5 that's officially licensed. This is a $300 controller that is not officially licensed. It's extremely, extremely unlikely, but if PlayStation said, we're not going to allow these unofficial controllers anymore, it has to actually be officially licensed or nothing, then this company, Brook, they're going to be in serious trouble. So that is always one of the risks that you take when you go for an unofficial controller. Again, I think it's highly unlikely that Sony would actually cut compatibility because Sony actually co-owns Evo. And if they pissed off almost everyone at Evo, you can be sure that the event would suffer, and they don't want that. But then again, I don't know how much of a financial dent that would make in Sony's wallet. If you don't like the officially licensed controllers that are out there, however, you can go for this instead. This has got a lot of character to it. They're very proud of their logo. They're very proud that they are one of the very few options being made in Europe, in France. One thing I did miss, which is really common on a lot of other controllers, is that nothing lights up. That's not a necessity. Actually, one of my main controllers that I use all the time has no light up features or anything on it. But I just happened to notice with this controller, probably because it's got these clear keycaps and just because there's so much glass on it, it feels like there are a lot of opportunities to have things light up or just be more accessible in a dark setting. I was often playing this at night when the lights were quite dim and low, and I was like, I can't figure out which of these options buttons I'm pressing, and I was reading the label, but it's, this label's really small anyway. Overall, the Squid Box Mark II is a much more polished feeling product. Even though the Squid Box Mark I was a very nice feeling controller, it had a number of cool features on it. By comparison, the Squid Box Mark II is a significant upgrade over the previous version because it's just got more character to it. I think the Mark II just feels much more intentional. I would happily bring this Squid Box Mark II to a local or to a tournament because it does the fundamentals very well, actually. And in a nice compact package with a look that will make people go, hey, what is that? I'd like to get one like that too. Listen, that's pretty much all I've got to say about the Squid Box Mark II. There are so many controllers out there at every different price point that you could possibly imagine. So make sure that you choose one that's right for you. And I'm very happy to hear that there's a company that's like holding the flag for manufactured leverless controllers in Europe. If you like the look of this controller and you think it'll match the rest of your setup aesthetically, then I'd say go for it. I've been NihongoGamer. Remember to subscribe to the channel and check out this video next if you're interested in leverless controllers and how to select a good one. Like this video and also comment below. I'd love to know what's important to you when you choose a leverless controller. Is it the look? Is it the personality? Is it the flashing lights? Or is it the functionality and the number of buttons? Let me know in the comments. That's all for now. I'll see you real soon.